know this is an odd way to start a theatre podcast, but I met Paul Gascoigne once, the footballer, famous player for Spurs in England. I was walking down the Via Veneto with the man I later married, who is Roman, Italian. So it must be 30 years ago, because we've been married a long time. And not long before, we'd met George Best on the King's Road. And we sat down for a drink on the Via Veneto. And there was Paul Gascoigne, who at that point was playing for Lazio. And he was with Jimmy Five Bellies something. I can't remember Jimmy. I just remember Jimmy being called Five Bellies. And he's all his English mates. And Via Veneto is the place that is famous from the Dolce Vita and is one of the most elegant bits of Rome. And he was a bit at sea. And my husband, because he is a very, very kindly and friendly soul, went over to help Paul with a bit of translation and a bit of settling him in, getting them the beers they wanted. And what was interesting was the waiter absolutely knew who he was. He absolutely knew that this man was a footballing superstar and had come to Lazio and was going to save Lazio. And we went over and talked with them for a little bit. And I can't remember what we talked about. Absolutely nothing, I think. How nice the restaurant was, how lovely it was to be in Rome. Was he settling into Lazio? Which I don't think he ever really did. I think it was a bad time for Gascoigne. And he was lovely. It's always a nice memory of Gascoigne. And we were talking about him.
There is a relevance to this story, which actually is a wonderful story, but there is a reason why we're telling it.
Well, which is that one of the plays of the year, we hope, is going to be Robert Icke's telling of the story of Raoul Moat in a play called Manhunt, which is coming on at the Royal Court in March.
Yep.
And Gascoigne has a weird link with this, which is that he actually turned up. The story of Raoul Moat, in case you don't know, is a man went on a terrible shooting spree and ends up being cornered by the police, and there's a siege. It's a rare thing and very dramatic. And in my memory was sort of tracked on telly quite a lot and in a way that wasn't very common for the time. And Robert Icke has decided it's a great subject for a play.
But Gascoigne showed up at the siege.
Yeah, showed up at the siege and claiming that he knew Moat, who was born in Newcastle. But afterwards, I think it emerged that he didn't know Moat and had, in a moment of madness, got into a taxi and said, "Take me to the siege. I can talk him out," saying that he could help. And now we wonder if he'll be a character.
It's one of a number of very intriguing shows that we have on our preview list for the rest of 2025, following our very dense part one, where we rattled through, well, it feels like the first few weeks of the year because there was so much going on. But here we're taking a longer view of some of the shows that are occupying the rest of the year and also some of the tours or returning shows. So this is things that we couldn't categorise as easily as things that are happening very soon.
Yeah, so this is the second episode of the Year Ahead 2025 What's on Stage podcast with me, Sarah Crompton.
And me, Alex Wood.
And yeah, so Royal Court, interesting year because it's the first full season of David Byrne's time in charge. And there's a really interesting mix of things. Before the Manhunt, he's bringing back Knock on the Roof, which is a play I like very much when I saw it at Edinburgh about Palestinians under occupation in Gaza, and which has incredible relevance to the time. And I'm excited that that's coming back and that more people will get a chance to see it.
Where would you like to begin in terms of our discussion points or shows that you're very excited about?
So many again. Well, should we start with musicals this time? Because we didn't talk about musicals very much. So the big one is Stephen Sondheim's final show.
Here we are.
Here we are.
Which is actually the title of the show, not just not just us alighting on it. Which was first seen in New York in 2023. Famously unfinished, according to some sources, and then finished by David Ives, who was a long-standing Sondheim collaborator, based on two films by Louis Buñuel.
One of my favourite film directors.
One of the best film directors of the 20th century. It's been described as quite an enigmatic musical.
Well, it's based on a show by Buñuel.
Yeah, so which not too surprising. And, you know, there's many different plot beats that sound quite eccentric. There's probably no point delving too deeply into them now, but the one thing that isn't enigmatic is the star quality of the cast, which is outrageously impressive. I think I've said this before, that this is probably the most starry Sondheim musical production at the National, maybe in the starriest musical at the National ever. Do you want to list off some names that you've got to have?
Well, Tracy Bennett, Dennis O'Hare, Martha Plimpton, who I love on a stage.
Then you've got Jane Krakowski, famous for 30 Rock and so many musicals. She was actually at the opening of Starlight Express because she was in the ensemble of the original Broadway production. Jessie Tyler Ferguson, that many will know from Modern Family. And then closer to home, you've got musical stars like Richard Fleischman and Chimisa Dunford-May, who we both adored in Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, which is running right now.
It's astounding cast. It's going to give the show the best legs it can. The whole thing around the death of Sondheim was so sad. He obviously had got so far down the road with the show, which he's been working on for a long time, and just hadn't quite finished it.
One last thing on Here We Are is that it's not completely sold out yet, which is honestly amazing. So you could be an early adopter and get in before it is standing room only and get a ticket now. I definitely recommend that, because I think come early spring, there won't be a single spot left.
Tickets will go. Yeah. And even if it's only a brilliant first half, which was sort of the summary of the reviews, nevertheless, it will be worth seeing with those people.
In terms of other musicals, there's a lot that are based on films that are coming along, which isn't unusual. That seems to be the case nowadays, is that we do get a lot of musicals based on films. We've got Sing Street, the off-Broadway hit that had its Broadway run cut short, but based on the film of the same name, which has some really, really lovely songs in it, if you've not heard it. That's about a group of school kids who want to form a band, and then they're also get obsessed with this girl a few years older than them, and it's really like earnest fun.
It's a nice
Everyone
film.
can relate. Such, and make you cry, make you laugh. There's great point about two brothers and their relationship that I never expected it to blindside me as someone that does have a younger brother, but really it got me in the feels. Then we've also got A Knight's Tale, the musical, based on the hit film with Heath Ledger and Paul Bettany.
Less, I'm going to say, but there you go.
I still remember when they have the We Will Rock You jousting session.
Yeah.
Brilliant performance by Paul Bettany as Chaucer in it, though. So yes, that's coming. It's going to have, I think, some sort of rock-heavy tunes attached to it. It's kind of sitting in a similar camp. Maybe not something like Back to the Future or Ghost, but more similar to & Juliet, I'd say, where it's just quite larger than life, neon heavy, big production values. It's directed by Matt Cole, who did Newsies, which was lavish and huge. So yeah, I think that could be a big popcorn heavy musical. And then my third one was Hercules at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, which is picking up where Frozen left off as Disney's big musical at Theatre Royal Drury Lane, after Jamie Lloyd completes his time doing lavish, starry Shakespeare productions. They go back.
After Shakespeare's kept the theatre warm for him.
It's another Greek classic, Disney's Hercules, with Alan Menken and David Zippel's brilliant music. So I'm very excited for that one. So yes, and that's it on the musical front. And there's obviously loads more that will come on to later.
Well, it's sort of it. But the other thing most intriguing is Hamlet, Hail to the Thief at Factory International at the Evita Studios in Manchester, which is, of course, the Radiohead album Hail to the Thief mashed up with Hamlet, which is an astonishing collision. And Tom York's very excited about it. Everyone's very excited about it. It's co-directed by Stephen Hoggart and Christine Jones, who are no strangers to creating theatrical magic.
Going back to what I said yesterday about when big music stars get involved in stage productions and they swan in, they do a few numbers for a few hours and then they only come back on opening night to give it a thumbs up. What I've heard from the team behind the show is that Tom York is so invested and so excited to see how this all plays out, which is really lovely that he loves Shakespeare. You never thought Radio Hamlet was going to be our big show for 2025.
And mood-wise, you can absolutely see how it works, because that album and that play have a sonority of mood that feels absolutely right. So I think it could be clever. And I'm a huge admirer of Factory International under John McGrath. I think he used to run the Manchester International Festival. He brings really interesting shows to fruition, and the space is great. It's very lively and a lovely place to visit. I'll be booking my trip back to my hometown for that one.
It's also transferring to the Royal Shakespeare Theatre afterwards, which means that there are 2 Hamlets on the RSC stages this year alone. So far. There might be more, which is very intriguing. But also, I wonder who's going to rock up to the first Hamlet being like, hang on a sec, where's the Radiohead? This is just Luke Sallen. So maybe that's why they've had to add the hail to the theme.
They could do an amazing ticket swap where they make everybody who's booked for Radiohead watch the Rupert Gould Hamlet on the main stage, and then, anyhow, there you go.
A Hamlet double bill. They just need Rosencrantz and Guildenstern somewhere on another stage. Maybe that is coming. We'll find out. Where else are you very excited over the coming year and across the UK, I guess?
On the subject of the North, I shall be making a trip across the Pennines, somewhat reluctantly as a Lancastrian, to Theatre Royal York, where Gary Oldman is coming back to the stage in Samuel Beckett's Krapp's Last Tape. And that's amazing because he hasn't been on stage since 1987 when he did Serious Money at the Royal Court, the Carol Churchill play, which I saw and which I'm ashamed to say I don't remember him in at all, but that is what he did. I should remember him, I'm sure. And I think Krapp's Last Tape is such a clever returning vehicle because it's a play that accommodates big personalities. The last time I saw Krapp's Last Tape was when Harold Pinter, well, actually I've seen it since then, but the most memorable was Harold Pinter doing it when you knew that he was dying and he was incredibly frail, and it was extraordinarily moving. It's a play that you can take so many different ways.
It's also a homecoming for Gary Oldman because he was in the York Theatre Royal Panto in 1979. So before his career took off, he played the cat in Dick Whittington and the Cat.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And you can actually, there are photos of him dressed as a cat that they found. And apparently he fainted because of the heat of the costume. Which, given Gary Oldman seems like one of the most rugged men in the world, you'd never think that he would faint because of a cat costume. It's probably why he never got cast in Cats.
Luckily
down the line. One of the cast members also said that Beric Kaler, who was in the panto with him, said, I was always dragging him saying, oh, the puss has gone to sleep, because he'd fainted. So I'm surprised that didn't scar him, and now he's coming back to prop up our regional venues. And I think that is so important that we do get star power outside of London, because these venues do need some big star names to attract them.
Yeah,
attract those audiences.
I mean, obviously he's had an incredibly successful film career and telly career, but he's coming back on the success of Slow Horses, for which he's been nominated for a Golden Globe, which is coming out at the end of this week on January 6, whether he's won it. And I think that show has brought him to more people playing Jackson Lamb, slovenly spy boss. And so, yeah, it's a nice moment to be coming back. And it's a bit like Ian McKellen's doing a tour where he went to all the places he played in his theatrical life. I like that idea of actors coming back to the theatres where they began. It's nice.
Reportedly, Oldman said, I'd only do this in York. So he wouldn't have done it anywhere else. So we wouldn't have been able to see that in London, for example. It's only because he's got that connection to York that he wants to do it there, and he wants to help out the venue. So more of that, please, in 2025.
Exactly. Well,
altruism from our stars. Yeah,
we have got some more of it in the sense that Ewan McGregor is returning to the UK stage after 17 years in My Master Builder, which reunites him with Michael Grandage, who directed the last thing he was on stage, I think. He was Iago in Othello to Chiwetel Ejiofor's Othello.
Interestingly about that production, and to go back to what we were talking about yesterday, Tom Hiddleston played Cassio in that version.
Oh, he did?
And then Kenneth Branagh saw him play Cassio and then thought, I need that guy in my Thor film. Just an interesting aside.
So that started the Marvel Universe and Tom Hiddleston.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But no, Ewan McGregor is such an interesting actor. I loved him in Fargo. Did you ever see that?
Yes, I did.
The way he played the two twins. He is long been missed from any stage, let alone a London stage.
I think I've seen most of his stage career because I also remember him in Little, Malcolm, and the
Struggles Against the Eunuchs.
Thank you.
Not that I didn't Google that real quickly.
It's not that he's a player. I remember with his uncle, Dennis Lawson, which was a long time ago in 1998. That was pre-Star Wars, I think.
Yeah.
Post-Trainspotting, pre-Star Wars. And you just sense this great presence on a stage. And yeah, I'm very happy he's coming back. Also returning. Should I do a few more star names returning? We've got Ruth Wilson in Moon for the Misbegotten at the Almeida later in the year.
With Michael Shannon.
With Michael Shannon. Difficult play, Eugene O'Neill, directed by Rebecca Frecknell, who is going through the American masters. And I always feel with Rebecca Frecknell the same thing. Anything she does is always worth watching. Even if it doesn't quite land for you, which Catherine Hopton Roof didn't for me. She is such an intelligent director, and I always want to know about what she's got to say about any play. And I feel Moon for the Misbegotten, which is tricky, O'Neill, is absolutely made for her, and indeed for Ruth Wilson.
She has worked with some really intelligent performers as well. Look at Patsy Ferran, look at Harriet Walter at the National Theatre in The House of Bernarda Alba.
Yeah.
Every time, it's almost like they're the actor and the director in conversation, and we get to witness that. And I think Ruth Wilson is one of the smartest performers of her generation. So I'm sure that this is going to be equally fascinating. If anything, Michael Shannon feels like the least interesting part of this, which is mean because he's a huge actor in his own right. Isn't he? Yeah,
he's absolutely immense. So yeah, that will be terrific to look forward to.
My other thought, segueing on from returns, is that we've got David Land back.
Oh yes.
But at the National Theatre. So the former artistic director of the Young Vic returning, and with long-term collaborator Juliet Stevenson, starring in The Land of the Living, directed by Stephen Daldry. So actor, writer, director, all some of the best in the business.
When's that on?
That opens in September 2025.
Oh gosh, that's a long way. That's a long way off to get excited about.
One of the last Rufus Norris programmed shows at the National Theatre.
And while we're doing that, his very last scheduled show is called Beautifully End.
Yeah.
And it's in November.
Yes.
And it's the end, not only of Rufus's sojourn as artistic director, but also of
David Eldridge's brilliant trilogy of plays, started with Beginning, followed by Middle, and now with End. All so ambitious in the way that they are utterly unambitious with their subject matter. It just follows two people at various stages of their relationship and the hardships and realities and almost uncharacteristic emotional responses they have to the world around them. I still remember being mesmerised by Beginning when that transferred to the Ambassadors Theatre. I thought it was one of the best two-handed plays of the century. I wasn't fortunate enough to see Middle, which I was still very gutted about. Sorry, David. I'm guessing End will have some sort of orbiting the idea of mortality and death in some capacity. I think it will be utterly heartbreaking, but I also think that Rufus has pulled off such a coup for this to be his last show.
And it's one of the interesting things about watching living playwrights, especially when they embark on a series of plays, because when we first saw Beginning at the National, there was no expectation beyond the sense that it was very exciting because it was a new play by David Eldridge, but it was so powerful, truthful about relationships. I think about it a lot, about the tentative steps towards forging a relationship between Justin Mitchell and Sam Troughton. And it ends with a fish finger sandwich. And I do occasionally eat a fish finger sandwich, and every time I eat a fish finger sandwich, I think about the dialogue in that play around the making of a fish finger sandwich, which gives you an indication of how rooted in reality it is. And Middle was the same, that I think about people getting up in the night and making hot drinks and talking about relationships and relationships spinning off their axis. And when I think about that or talk about it to friends or talk about relationships going wrong, it's a play that comes into my mind. I think he's extraordinarily precise in how he writes about emotions, David Eldridge. So yes, and I look forward to so much. And tickets will be available because it's not yet on sale.
No, not yet on sale.
Keep an eye out.
My problem also is I keep mistaking Here and Now with Here We Are. And Here and Now is the Steps musical. And Here We Are is the Sondheim musical. And the number of times that I recommended oh, you should go and see the new Here and Now musical by Stephen Sondheim. Is what Sondheim's writing a musical for Steps all of a sudden. Sorry, this is
That's
a
like
wild aside.
That's like the collision of the two Hamlets. I think we're getting a lot of confusion.
Could you imagine? We should attend the tragedy of Sweeney Todd with like 5, 6, 7, 8 victims or something. That's some Steps jokes. Anyway, totally agree on beginning. One thing that I would say about that play is, as I've strayed further into my 30s, it's felt even more pertinent than it was when I first saw it as a mid-20s man. There I felt like these people were disillusioned and jaded and desperate. It's almost like he's laying benchmarks for my entire adult life that I didn't know at the time.
Which is true, yeah.
Give it a few more years and then Middle will all of a sudden feel relevant. But it's also nice that the shows have been revived. So I think there was a Royal Exchange production of Beginning, so they've almost picked up the trilogy, and hopefully the Royal Exchange will also do Middle and hopefully do End, and in time they might do all three in Rep or whatever, and in the same way they have with the Death of England plays. And it shows that glorious contribution that Rufus Norris has made to the theatrical canon over his 10 years at the National.
And just to carry on with that thought, there's a really interesting revival as well that's part of his final season, which is of London Road, the Alecky Blythe show, which, linking with the Realm Moat, is about a very famous series of murders in Ipswich. And what makes it so distinctive is that the words of real people talking about the murders and the effect on their lives are A, verbatim, and B, sung. So it's a musical about tragic events, which seemed, when it was first announced, I remember thinking, I just can't see this working. Yeah. And yet it worked so brilliantly.
There's always that thing about musicals having to come from a place of suspending disbelief. And also, when you can't say it, you sing it. And I think that's utterly turned on its head here, because these are things that people did say, but actually the circumstances are so incredible and so horrifying that there aren't the words, so you just have to sing. That show has a profound effect on me, even now, to know that verbatim theatre can move people in that way. I've seen actually quite a few, not copycat, but similar musicals where they have taken true stories and found verbatim anecdotes and applied them to music. And they've all really worked, and I think it is a really rich form of storytelling that we're only just really seeing the start of.
And looking back, I think it will be seen as one of the most influential shows of Rufus Norris's directing career, though in fact it was commissioned for the National Theatre by Nicholas Heitner, so in the previous incarnation. But lovely that he's bringing it back for his final season.
Speaking of musicals that are being brought back, Jamie Lloyd is bringing back Evita. His 2019 production of Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice's musical was received with acclaim from critics, and I think it picked up a number of awards. Now it is moving indoors to the London Palladium. We spoke to Jamie Lloyd, who described it more as an evolution rather than a simple transfer of the show. So anyone who liked it at Regent's Park probably won't feel like they know exactly what they're going to get when they sit down in the London Palladium. Evita is one of my favourite musicals, and also Donald Trump's, I think, which is pretty awful. But again, even then, I think it's funny that it's been staged twice and both in Trump administration eras. What does that say about us and about the president? Yes, and there could be some very starry casting announced very soon, I believe, as to who exciting. Might be taking on the lead role.
Well, it's insightful about power, which is probably why it is being revived twice in two Trump eras, because I think the American presidency under Trump does ask those questions about power and its exercise. It couldn't be like it was at the open air because it was so stripped back at the open air. I mean, I saw it a rainy night and it was rain-slicked bleachers. It was incredibly simple. So I can see that he would have to evolve it for the Palladium. But exciting. It's so different. It seems slightly wrong to make the link, but there is another revival coming, which is at the Royal Court, of Sarah Kane's 448 Psychosis, which extraordinarily they're hoping to do with the original cast. So Daniel Evans, Madeline Potter and Joe McInnes. I think that play is arguably one of the greatest of the 21st century. It's certainly one of the most influential. I'm struck by how many people actually find it both an entry into theatre and an entry into understanding of depressive illness. It's the most wonderful piece.
It's such a coup for all involved. I wonder at what point in Daniel Evans's tenure as co-artistic director of the RSC they thought, all the parts are here, let's just do it. He's also starring as Edward II a bit before that as well, so he's got a very busy year beyond co-artistic
Tamara
director.
Harvey's going to be doing some heavy lifting.
In his, whilst he's performing in the evening. It's such a coup for all involved. And also for it to be in that smaller space. You know, they could have done that downstairs in the big Jerwood space, but chose not to. And I think that says a lot about why they're doing this production.
Yeah. No, it'd be so interesting. And interestingly, London Road, they're also talking about getting the original cast back. But we don't know that they're going to succeed in that. But that is also the intention, because young actors like Rosalie Craig were in it and now would be the right age for the characters. So there is something fascinating about bringing the original cast back to a show many years on.
Speaking of shows that are returning, but actually some not with their original cast, we've rounded up some shows that are returning from 2024, but now being played in new venues.
Yeah.
So aren't completely transformed, but may have a new backdrop or new stars, like the case of Dear England, James Graham's Olivier Award-winning play, which we both adore to the ends of the earth, coming back, but now with a new Gareth Southgate in the form of Gwilym Lee, taking over from Joseph Fiennes, donning the prosthetic nose and teeth, which I'm so fascinated because for me, Southgate and Joseph Fiennes are almost like mentally synonymous now, but actually seeing a new Southgate for a new version of Dear England makes sense, because I think Southgate's image has changed now that he has left. And I think he's remembered differently to how he was perceived during his time as England manager. Yeah,
and James Graham's updated the play, hasn't he, to draw the new lessons from it. So that's a very interesting thing of a play that really was complete being revamped as it returns. So, yeah, I've seen it twice now, so I'll book for the third time.
Also watching the Euros thinking, how is James Graham going to bring this all together? Because especially after we didn't win, spoiler alert, we got so close. But then, is it still the same ending? Because actually then we can also, we've seen the England squad since, and what's happened with the national discourse around English football since, that I think James Graham has to write a very different play now to the one that he did.
It's really interesting, the challenging. It's quite football inflected podcast that we're doing here with Paul Gascoigne and this England. Anyhow, what are your other returns?
So, other returns, I'm going to rattle through these.
Go on, I'll make excitable noises.
James Graham has another play, also going to be on the South Bank, or near enough, with Punch, the 5-star hit, transferring from regional powerhouse Nottingham Playhouse, with a lot of its original cast coming back, including the wonderful Julian Hesmanhal, who I can't wait to see on stage. My Neighbour Totoro, coming back for its third run, this time in the West End, finally. I knew that after the first season at the Barbican, they were looking for somewhere for it to go, but there's such a bottleneck of West End shows that can go into big spaces that they had to wait a little while, so they went back to the Barbican. Now they're going into the West End. I think that's going to be a blockbuster hit at the Gillian Lynn. So, and also it's just nice to see that space given over to big plays. Got the Lehman trilogy in there at the moment, just coming to the end of its run, so you can listen back to our podcast with the cast of the Lehman trilogy. But to go from a 3-hander to a 3-story tall puppet is a really, really interesting feat, but I think it's going to be so magical.
It'll do so well. Run and Run. It's a charming show.
Going from big puppet shows to tiny plays, we spoke about Weather Girl, which was my play of 2024, now going into the Soho Theatre, which should be even more impressive now, given the change in political landscape. But speaking of political landscapes, there's also Kyoto, the RSC production with Good Chance Theatre that is moving to at Soho Place.
Yeah, so that will be good. Lonely Londoners, which I mentioned last time, will be coming to the Kiln.
Another show that's heading south is Ken Rex, Jack Holden and Ed Strambulian's solo play about a murder that takes place in broad daylight that no one who sees it wants to report on it. Very fascinating deep dive into Americana, which seems to be a running theme for 2025. Can't wait for that one.
And then Giant, Mark Rosenblatt's play, which had its first live at the Royal Court, which stars a magnificent John Lithgow playing Roald Dahl and examines Dahl's anti-Semitism and the way in which he was essentially a charming monster. It's a riveting play, and I'm very glad it's getting a West End run, because I think it was one of the best new plays of last year, and so to have a run this year is very good.
It sounds as though a Broadway run has also almost certainly been locked down at this point, so who knows, by the time this podcast episode comes out, it might have already been announced.
Indeed.
One final thing I wanted to say, listening to all of these transfers, is just how many of them have been supported by or originated at national portfolio organisations that are supported by the Arts Council. That's where some of the most interesting plays are being produced, and actually they shore up the West End when they do transfer in. And it's a repeated theme on this podcast that those regional venues are where you get to see the most exciting plays first before they come to London. If anything, London languishes a few months behind the rest of the UK. So one thing I was going to quickly alight on, because we realised that there are lots of shows returning, but a lot of them did seem to be returning to London. But there's also so many touring productions that are bringing in audiences across the UK with big names or big musicals, stuff like 222 A Ghost Story, which has a running trend of casting every flavour of the month in terms of which celebrity is going to be starring in it, but does bring out the audiences. It's a cheap show with 4 cast members. There's no scene changes, and if it keeps the audiences coming, then it's great that it's
theatre is
back.
Pure entertainment.
Yeah, it is pure. It's theatre for the Netflix generation. It's episodic, and it's got that red neon flare that you get from Stranger Things, and it's a ghost story that builds up the tension. They've also got a new production of Kinky Boots, which is opening in Leicester with Strictly Starred Johannes, who was much loved.
Yes.
Playing Lola, which is lovely. Then we've also got West End shows like Moulin Rouge, Matilda, Tina, all going out on tour.
Right.
Again, big shows that are probably going to do very well. And then we've got a new production of Miss Saigon that Michael Harrison is producing with Cameron Mackintosh, which is very interesting because Miss Saigon is one of Cameron Mackintosh's beloved shows. It's like part of his portfolio. But it's fascinating that Michael Harrison, also a huge blockbuster producer, responsible for the London Palladium, was one of the producing team on Sunset Boulevard, produced Hello Dolly last year, is now joining with Cameron on this new production, almost like a passing of the baton with the Miss Saigon side of things. Then we've also got Boys from the Black Stuff, Calamity Jane, The Bodyguard, big tours that should hopefully see these venues full of audiences that hopefully should start getting into a rhythm of going to the theatre regularly, seeing shows that they like or shows that they've heard about in the West End. Now they can see them closer to home without having to trek in on the train for 3 hours to come and see them in London. So yeah, hopefully we'll see a bit of a burgeoning regional theatre scene.
Yeah, sounds really hopeful. And just to close, because I've forgotten to mention it in this great 2-part ramble through everything we're excited about, if you ask me my 2 favourite playwrights writing at the moment, probably I would say Annie Baker and Lynn Nottage. I love them both, and I love the way they shine unexpected light on unexpected lives. For years, I have wanted to see Lynn Nottage's Intimate Apparel, which a story is set in 1905 in Harlem about a seamstress based on her own great-grandmother's life. It's coming to the Donmar. It's being directed by Lynette Linton. Their collaboration on Sweat was one of the great plays of the last decade.
Hopefully we've successfully woven together this these multiple recommendations for 2025. It's looking like a pretty solid year, I'd say.
Yeah, and I hope we've whetted your appetite for it. Certainly the early part of the year seems very thrilling.
It's too much going on. Again, to end where I began, it's just kind of overwhelming, isn't it? To know that we won't be able to get to all of these shows is quite sad. I want to see them all.
I know. Well, maybe I'll get to most of them. You always miss something.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that however devoted a theatre goer you are, you always miss something. But I will do my best to get to a lot of these. And next week, we thought we'd slightly change our tack for the podcast and ask you what you would like us to talk about.
Yes, so please, if you can, in the comments, ask us a question about whatever theatre-related subject might spring to mind.
And we will try to answer it. And maybe it will be about the plays coming up. Maybe it'll be about the plays you've seen. Maybe it'll be about a bit of history. We've also got an email you could send a question to, which is
feedback@whatsonstage.com.
So one way or another, it will be very, very nice to hear from you. and let us know what you want to know.
I'm very excited to see what our listenership come back with. There could be all manner of strange things we have to discuss on the new podcast that aren't related to football.
Yes, I won't take football questions on this particular podcast. I will be ready with my multiple theatre encyclopedias to try and answer anything you want to know. And until then, it's goodbye from me, Sarah Crompton.
And a goodbye from me, Alex Wood. Thank you for listening to this episode of the What's on Stage podcast. Make sure you like, follow, or leave us a rating wherever you can. Have a wonderful rest of your week.